Posso andare? Okay. Thank you again for being here. It's been a long day, we know. This is our last step, though. And now we will be actually presenting this book, Fantasmi Neri, Black Ghosts. And there is a special reason why I'm here with Timothy Remakers, Elena Lamberti, and Pierluigi Musarò, because they all had a story that has to do with the performance or the book. They're somehow related. Pietro has collaborated with them in different occasions. And so we thought that rather than having the author speaking for the book, we could have this other looks, somehow giving an emphasis on some of the topics of the issues that somehow are dealt with in the text. And this is a very particular text because I will just show you an image. You've seen how Sara works. So it is an iconographic text, but its chapters are devoted to one thematic topic. And the topic is never arrived at because of an aesthetic reason. It comes out of the construction of the original source and out of a need to speak about some political, social, critical cultural issues. And eventually, what comes into the book is that collage. But this book is also the outcome of a process that somehow started when working at the performance, The Nigger of the Narcissus, in 2019. But eventually, with the pandemics and with the long time in which it was impossible to perform, it continued to grow and evolve through this collaboration between Pietro and Sara. And in this process, some other interlocutors were met and somehow participated in the construction and idea beyond this book. So I know it's late, and hopefully you have the opportunity to somehow look at the book afterwards. I know Sara will be speaking through her words, that is, showing images of the book and also drawing as we speak, and I will follow the order that is somehow dictated by this collaboration that somehow evolved around the performance and the book. So the first person I would like to invite to talk to us is Timothy Remakers. Timothy Remakers is Senior Assistant Professor at the Geography section of the University of Bologna. His research focuses on the power relations underpinning contemporary supply chain capitalism, with particular attention to liminality, borders, and the politics and aesthetics of difference. He has co-authored a collection on the Black Mediterranean, published with Palgrave, and is currently finalizing a book on the bordering of migrant labor in southern Italy and a contract with the Cornell University Press. And Pietro told me, the person who actually suggests I work on The Nigger of the Narcissus, it's been Timothy Remakers. So that's why we start with Timothy. And the question I ask you is, why The Nigger of the Narcissus today?
Thanks very much, Rossella. Thanks for giving me the credit. I don't know if you're happy with the suggestion, but I think what has come out of this very small suggestion is actually become a huge project. So it's really my compliments and congratulations to Pietro and the whole team. So. Thanks also for suggesting the title of the small sort of introduction I will give today. So why The Nigger of the Narcissus today? I would actually like to change the title. Why The Nigger of the Narcissus in Italy today? I'm saying this because first of all, because of the N-word in the title. I think if you were in the US, even the title of the piece would have been changed. And that has, of course, to do with a particular history of Black Atlantic slavery. Yeah? That said, I think the history of the Black Mediterranean and relation to blackness in Italy is different. That's not to say that slavery hasn't existed in the Mediterranean. Quite on the contrary. Actually, historians are now recognizing, and only now, that the medieval sugar plantations on which black slave labor was deployed were the first instance of slavery that then traveled onwards to the Atlantic and to the Caribbean. And that brings me to the first fundamental point in relation to the book and to the project. So why is it important to still talk about these issues today? And what is inspiring about this book written by Joseph Conrad? And that has to do everything with racial capitalism. So, as is also written in the introduction to the Penguin Classics edition, the book really talks about the different ways in which the crew of the Narcissus are trying to take ownership of weight in different ways. And that is, so, you know, the book starts with actually sort of the cosmopolitan character of mercantile capitalism, let's say, and the ship as a trope of colonialism and hybridity at the same time. People coming from everywhere, Finland, Poland, and so on, make part of the crew, and so that they intermingle in this mix of mercantile ship crews, but not so for weight. He's not mingling. I mean, he's sort of even if the rest of the crew, and I quote here from the book, stands equal before the unconcerned immensity of the sea, weight is being placed there as belonging to the ship. Full stop. And that's exactly what racial capitalism is about, I think. It's about the legal and the social categories that reconfigure Black bodies in terms that feed capital. And so that's what I find inspiring about this book, and why it's also important to still use this book as a trope, as a platform to talk about racial capitalism today. If we think about the history of Italian colonialism, not talked about, not addressed, especially not addressed is the fact that Italy has been the country that is the first in history to propose racial laws. If we think about the whole history of rural capitalism in the Mediterranean and in sub-Saharan Africa, we see this constant, not always successful, attempts to reconfigure the bodies of colonized populations in ways that feed capital, while externalizing their social reproduction. And so I'm insisting here on the point that we shouldn't see racial capitalism just as a skin color fact of racial prejudice, but it is more about the chronomatic norms that drive the reproduction of capitalism from southern Italy to sub-Saharan Africa. So that's the first reason. The second reason, so why today? After all, you could say there's no slavery. Slavery is being abolished, at least officially. Colonial imperialism lays behind us, at least officially. So first level of critique, of course, we can immediately raise here has to do with sort of the neo-colonial deployment of northern states and industries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, that reproduce the figure of blackness as an antithesis to civilization. I'm not the first one to say this. Achille Mbembe, who's come many times to Bologna, in his last book also on Black Reason, repeats that point based on the scholarship of course, also Frantz Fanon. No? And I think the Nigger of the Narcissus as a book is very topical in that respect, because Wade is presented there like very directly as a black hole of where civilization doesn't stick. Okay. At some point in the book, Conrad writes that his very presence makes the light retreat. Yeah? And the way in which the crew members are trying to take ownership of his body, of his presence, is either through contempt or through violent imposition and submission, all reproduce his black body as an antithesis to civilization. I'm making a quick jump here to the critique on humanitarian industry that is also in part victimizing black presence in the Mediterranean still today. And in that sense, the Narcissus also forms like a very concrete connection. The Belgian ship, Charles Heller and Pezzani, two scholars who actually have been denouncing the lack of assistance, the lack of support to migrants in need in the Mediterranean. The Belgian ship that they denounced was actually culpable of not supporting migrants in need in the Mediterranean in the midst of the so-called migration crisis 2011, when the war broke out in Libya, was called Narcissus. Okay, so it's a very sort of curious petite histoire here to that also reconfirms this very principle of humanitarianism as a way of victimizing and at the same time not giving agency to black presence and black people in the Mediterranean. So that leads me to the second level of critique, and that is maybe a little bit more difficult to explain, but the way in which Wade actually, in Conrad's words, in an uncondescending stubbornness, is refusing any kind of contempt towards his suffering, to me provides an opening to a form of black resistance that is not enough recognized. Maybe some of you have listened to Sons of Kemet latest album, Black to the Future. There's a beautiful song there, Field Negus, in which the poet Joshua Indeben comes back to this point, saying that we don't need your equality. It was never there for us to be it was never there for us, so it always comes too little and too late. And I was reminded of this passage when I spent some time in Casa Sanquera, in the south of Italy, where also Cantiere Meticci spent some time with Hervé Latir and Mbaye Ndiaye. I'm not going to tell the story here. If you're interested, you can read a chapter in the book that I co-edited on the Black Mediterranean. These two figures, these two Senegalese protagonists of Casa Sanquera, who escaped from one of the biggest ghettos of southern Italy, both denounced the criminal gang masters that were exploiting their labor in the fields of southern Italy to pick tomatoes, harvest tomatoes that are ending up on our plates every day. And at the same time, they also denounced what they called the humanitarian industry complex that continued to victimize them rather than giving them the agency to change their own fate. But as they were doing that, and as they were organizing their resistance, I kept also being reminded to a particularly interesting passage in the Nigger of the Narcissus, where one of the crew members, irritated and angry at the lack of response from Wade to his attempts to save him, says, "Blank his black soul." So, in order to be recognized as full bodies and citizens within the Italian nation state, that is actually the price that people like Hervé Latier and Baindiai, and I would say Afro-Italian, Black Italian non-citizens continue to have to pay for their let's say their desire to belong. I'll keep it at that.
Thank you, Timothy, for this very interesting talk you gave. I think there's so much we could talk about in terms of what you raised, victimization, forms of resistance, but also all this, the reconfiguration of Blackness, particularly in respect to capitalism and to the situation in Italy. But now, actually, we'll have time later to for some questions. Now, I'd like to leave the floor to Pierluigi Musarò. And Pierluigi Musarò is full professor of sociology, culture, and communication at the Department of Sociology and Business Law here at University of Bologna. He is honorary professor at Melbourne University and research fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Science and at the Institute for Public Knowledge, New York University. He's author of several books and papers in the field of media and migration, borders and human rights, performing arts, and active citizenship. President of the Italian NGO IODA and founding director of Ithaca, Migrants and Travelers Festival of Responsible Tourism, and founding member of the Italian Network Against Hate Speech. And The Nigger of the Narcissus, the performance that had its premiere in 2019, had its premiere within a project that was called Atlas of Transition. Atlas of Transition was a Europe-funded Horizon project, and Pierluigi Musarò coordinated the 6 universities that were partner of this project. So again, we find a link here to the very beginning of this process, through the making of the theater production. So I will leave the word and the floor to Pierluigi, and particularly asking of him somehow a reflection on this representation, this reconfiguration of the other, which is so central also inside this book, and that was clearly part of the creative process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rossella, and thanks to Pietro and Sara for inviting me. Yes, I mean, I was part of this project Atlas of Transition, so I still remember Pietro going with the group in Greece on this little beach after the meeting, and while all the people were swimming and enjoying the sun, he was with the nigger under the water, quoting like everything like that, and all people, I mean, like all tourists watching him like, what is doing this guy? I mean, it was like until here with the water of the sea, because it was very warm, and with the Nigger of Narcissus, Pietro was like that and was reading like that, right? And all people around say, what are doing these Italian guys? And even in the flight, if there were like some empty moment, it was there so concentrated. So I was so curious about that. And I didn't know Sara at that moment. So then I discovered also like this kind of artistic couple of of minds and bodies working on this novel. And then after the show, now I saw also like the book, and this is like, it's a masterpiece to me, really. I'm very, very happy and glad to say this, because I mean, we usually read a lot of book, a lot of other stuff, because, I mean, being professors, you are forced to read a lot of stuff. But it was really a very, very, very emotional trip to me to re-enter into the Niger of Narcissus, thanks to your work, because really, I mean, I consider this not only the show, and maybe even more the book than the show, a masterpiece, a master of peace, a gangmaster of peace, maybe, something like that. Because as you say, Rossella, there are different registers, images, quotes, authors, I mean, and it's very, very interesting. Let me say a couple of things just about, I think you were asking about the role of the mask and the construction of the other. Timothy was stressing the part about racial capitalism and the responsibility of European colonialism. And this is more about the historical legacy, and that, of course, we are still seeing now, because when we talk about climate change, Anthropocene, Capitalocene, we are talking about this kind of racial and extractist capitalism. But at the same time, we should focus a little bit on the imaginary, on the discourses, on the narratives on the other. And the other in this case is the mask, the black mask, the mask of the black people, which is interesting because the mask is, I mean, the mask, if you think the normal mask, right, is a tool with which to capture the supernatural power of the spirits. Through the mask, we appropriate of the power of the spirits, and we use it, if you think about like the shaman or the Pai de Santo or whatever, I mean, to benefit the community, right? This is the mask. But the mask is also related, strictly related with the concept of persona, right? I mean, persona in, I think it comes from the Latin persona, which is mask also. In Etrusc was perso, in Greek prosopon. So there is this link where persona is the individual, is the subject, is not just human nature, is the human being, is the single human being. And beyond the controversial between using individual, persona, or subject, or I mean, it's important to see that express something that is peculiar, but it's also something that we have in common. As persona, we have a specificity as one single individual, but also we have in common humanity with the humankind. And so I think that it's very interesting to explore the relationship between the mask and persona, where the black mask is kind of the nigger persona, right? Shall we use negro or not? All the first part of the book is interesting. All the dialogues that you developed about, shall we use the negro of the Narcissus or not? I was remembering when I was in New York, and my good friend, my colleague at the New York University, one day I was saying, hey, you know, because you Jew. And he told me, wait a moment, Pierluigi, you cannot say Jew. I say, why not? I mean, you all call you Jew. Yes, but we are Jew. You not. So you have to say Jewish. And I was, okay, I understood. And I think it's the same, right? I mean, I can accept if someone call me Terrone because he or she is also Terrone, right? But if you use Terrone in another way, I feel uncomfortable. And so I think that also with the Negro could be the same. How can you use this word of the Negro within a system? So in this case, the mask is nothing about supernatural or even natural, but it is the output, the result of a social, historical, anthropological, economic process that we can call the capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, racism, discrimination, submission. And the mask is the result, is the role, a personification of many stereotypes that we dictated by white fears, and white fears after centuries of the civilizing mission, right? The mission civilisatrice. when I tell to my students, like, do you think that black people, they have a soul? And they watch me like, oh, come on, prof. I mean, if we are lucky, there are some black people with us in class, right? So they feel very uncomfortable. But then they say, I discussed with them, I say, look, this was a big debate for centuries. I mean, the church was debating if black people have the soul, because if they have a soul, they are son of God. And so you cannot make them slave. So I'm not saying something out of the blue. I'm just reporting a debate. And shall we discuss still within this debate? So they feel very impressed, right? But this mask of the black soul is also a label of sin, is a sign of guilty, is, I mean, not being a human being for the church. So there are some tensions and contradictions when we talk about the black marks. First of all, it's interesting because the novel and the spectacle also start with this black spot, right? So it's not just the black mask, but it's the black spot on the name. And here is erasing persona, and you become something more, something different, which is a spot. But the black spot is the first sign of the disease, right? Which is at the center of this black guy. How can be possible that black guy who are hard worker, hard man, strong bodies, they are sick? How could be possible that this guy has a disease? So at the same time, it's also a metaphor, right? Because having a disease, it means or that you are acting as a fake, as all the other sailors say, right? Ci è o ci fa, right? This guy, I mean, is really sick or is kind of acting because he doesn't want to work, because we lavoriamo come i negri, ma anche i negri non vogliono lavorare, right? It's like, so there is this kind of contradiction. But then, like, the disease is also something that you are culpable of the infection. I remember when there was like the period of COVID, if you remember, like for 1 year, every night at 6, there was someone in television saying, today we have a lot of infection, we have a lot of people who died, whatever. Suddenly, Regione Calabria start to say, today we have 35 infected people, and 18 migrants, or 18 of them are migrants. You remember this? It took like a few weeks before, I mean, someone, I hope like the ministry, saying, why are you doing this? I mean, there is nothing fair about that. You are not adding information. But for some weeks, Regione Calabria, and then fall of Lazio, and then I think the ministry stopped there, they were saying how many migrants there were within the disease. Because there is the idea, like that the foreigners, the strangers, they bring the infection. Think also about the quarantine ships. Suddenly, 7 quarantine ships were set up in front of Lampedusa, of Sicily, the same ships that were cruise for tourists, but tourism was not working because there was COVID. So the state was paying private company to confine, to border foreigners in case of disease. So in this case, there is also a sort of guilty, right? So on the same mask, we project our fears, the fear of death, of disorder, of confusion, of infection. The black mask is the dark side of the soul, is the shadow of our light, but also is the place, the way in which we project our frustrated fantasies, hopes. I mean, I was thinking when there is the revolt, right? We are ready, the sailors, to revolt against the captain, Materassi and whatever, but then nothing happened. Because I think that the white guys are projecting on the black, who is guilty, who is sick, or whatever. But yes, it could be the Black Lives Matter, because it's Black Lives Matter. We are tired. We have other stuff to do now, right? So if they do this, yes, we can project our revolt. And this is very interesting also, this. But there is no revolt of the oppressed. Why? Because this guy at the end is reduced to naked life. It's just naked life, as you were saying, the humanitarian victimization. What we do with these black people, or we use the humanitarian narrative, the humanitarian frame, and then I saw that you quote like Alan Kurdi, the Sudan photographer, and all the other. But what happened? When you victimize these people, you reduce these people to naked life, to body, to something that's talking about the Narcissus. I was thinking about Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum was a tentative to not only save these people, but also to change the narratives, because we have to justify the 9 million per month that we were spending as Italy. But at the same time, the Marina Militare, the government, created a sort of hyper-visibility of this Mare Nostrum. And also the name is interesting, because who used Mare Nostrum? The Roman Empire and Mussolini. I'm very curious if the guy who is in the Marina Militare or in the press office of the ministry is aware about that when they decided to call it Mare Nostrum. Maybe not, I don't know. But it's interesting also. But in this case, they were creating a sort of hyper-visibility that make invisible the reality, right? Talking about victims, saving lives and whatever. Or at the same time, there is the other strategy, there is the criminalization. Or we have the victims, or we have the criminals. And of course, is a sort of structural system. I mean, the state, in order to govern people who are on the move, there is the sort of kinetophobia, right? People who are on the move, I mean, they are dangerous, and so we have to stop them. And so the criminalization is one of the strategies. So just want to conclude saying something about, usually when we talk about this kind of communication, of visibility, of representation, we should be aware that there is an ethics of showing and an ethics of seeing, right? I mean, if we decide to show or not to show the picture of Aylan Kurdi or other kind of picture that became icon in sad terms, right? We choose something. We choose to show something, but at the same time, we are hiding something. At the same time, journalists or media can decide to show something, but then sometimes we don't have the capacity to see what they are inviting us to show. So to me, like the big work that this book and show has done is to show what is out of the frame. Because in the Nigger of Narcissus, there is maybe also the tentative of Conrad to denounce what was colonialism, but he was into his period, right? And so it was completely overwhelmed within a system. And still, I think that even now, when we read this book, we don't have the ability to go out of the frame. While Pietro, Sara, and all the other actors of Cantiere Viticcio, and also through your methodology, which is collective, participated all together, I think that you don't only show what is out of this frame, but also create a sort of architecture of listening for us to listen to the voices of the other people that usually are silenced by this representation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierluigi. I think you touched several issues that are actually so central within this book, because in fact, if we go through the chapters, all these topics have been somehow the object of an investigation and have been deconstructed with the actors, and they're absolutely seminal for understanding the kind of work that is made and how it connects to what is outside, and to get into the complexity of this representation. But now I'd like to leave the floor to Elena Lamberti, because in the end we're talking about a book that somehow we should connect also to the world literature. And Elena has already worked on the draft copy of this text in a chapter of a book on the Introduzione alla World Literature, Introduction to World Literature, edited by Silvia Albertazzi. And Elena Lamberti is associate professor in North American literatures, is a specialist of modernist literature, cultural memory, literature and media ecology, war literature, literature and cognitive sciences. Author of several volumes and of a number of essays and book chapters on Anglo-American modernism and American-Canadian literature and culture. She pursues an interdisciplinary methodology of research where literature stands at the core of innovative investigations of complex ecosystems. Her volume, Marshall McLuhan's Mosaic, Probing the Literary Origins of Media Studies, received the MEA Award 2016 Award for Outstanding Book in the Field of Media Ecology. She's affiliated to the Mobile Media Lab, Concordia University of Montreal, and to the Media Ethics Lab, University of Toronto. She directed the U project Perform Migrations, People Are the Territory. And I'll leave the floor to you. With a question. How is a post-colonial critique enacted through this aesthetic product? And we'll have the pictures of the book maybe going, if I know you don't mind about that.
No, on the contrary, I'm honored. Thank you, Rossella. Thank you, Pierluigi, and my fellow here. Thank you for this invitation. It's an honor and it's a pleasure. And it's fantastic to remember that we are in Bologna. I think one of the few cities where you have a terrone, mentioning not only Latin, Greek, but Etruscan. I think it's the only town where you can actually be so cosmopolitan. But thank you for this invitation. It's an honor to be here because I was not there at the beginning of the project. I'm here now. And this is when I feel I'm becoming part of your community, Pietro and Sara. Thank you so much. So I want to dedicate this no more than 10-minute talk to Sara Poor, who through her delicate but determined drawings has taught me different forms of resilience and resurgence. I know that her mind and her heart are both here and somewhere else right now, but I'm confident, Sara, that each of your drawing helps us to move towards a better and more just society. So thank you. So it all started with a book, a classic of British literature, a classic of modernism, a classic of European literature and of colonial literature, then a classic of post-colonial studies, and finally a classic of what today we call world literature. The Nigger of the Narcissus is in fact a mobile classic, shifting meaning across traditions and literary taxonomies. In its new form, it is now the black ghosts, hunting our comfort zones as inhabitants of a globalized society, sitting on the right side of the fence. This is why, in a recent written collection of essays discussing world literature, we have chosen to investigate Sara and Pietro's rewriting of the Nigger of the Narcissus as the perfect example of what literature can do today to create a new semantics and a new universal language to address unavoidable ethical issues. Post-colonial literary discourse has been instrumental in reclaiming the many words neglected or destroyed by the Eurocentric imperialist vision. A reclamation that led eventually to the self-representation of peripheral cultures already engulfed by a hegemonic and cannibalistic center that appropriated otherness by domesticating it into exotic or condescending platitudes, as Silvia Albertazzi taught us. By so doing, post-colonial literary critique played and plays a key role in giving voice to those who had been denied it, bringing to the surface a transnational consciousness that made it impossible for the so-called civilized world us to say, I did not know. Since the 1980s, the rewriting of classics from dominant traditions, translations of texts from realities considered subaltern, new linguistics, cross-hybridizations, and new narratological registers from non-Western realities have contributed to redesign the cultural and political identity of an increasingly interdependent world. Rather than imagining new possible worlds, those narratives have recovered lost traditions, untold stories, and injustices justified by a distorted and Eurocentric idea of progress. Moreover, and perhaps most important, they have appropriated Western canons, certainly to deconstruct them, but often, and this is problematic, perhaps unconsciously confirming them. Injustice relies also on invisible systemic narrative patterns, involuntarily stored through the way we inhabit our mediated, in fact, serialized or culturally homogenized interdependent environments. Therefore, in the contemporary literary scenario and moving beyond the post-colonial, world literature can become the terrain where all differences enter into dialogue, no longer and not only to remember, to claim, to do justice, or to make amends, all important actions to be preserved and defended, but to move a step further and imagine other possible worlds together, to build and rebuild trust through a renewed transcultural creativity, and not only to denounce or cultivate terror. World literature can and must become an indispensable function to the pursuit of planetary happiness, where the idea of happiness can no longer be inscribed in the globally Americanized word that translates happiness into primarily economic success, wealth as a status symbol, but in a harmonious, equitable, and respectful relationship built by listening to other life practices, imagining other possible stories. As Nishabek indigenous writer and activist Liane Beta Samosake Simpson says, it is not that difficult. Just let us decide to change the perspective and define another idea of wealth. Let us decide to bank not money, but relationships. Let us not laugh at this concept of happiness, for it's neither naive nor illusory utopian. On the contrary, it is profoundly ecological, since the environment, oikos, is constructed in our reason from the language that contains it, logos. Storytelling matters. Black Ghosts goes in that direction. If the text fits into the post-colonial tradition and continues to unveil historical and systemic inequalities, the Cantieri Meticci rewriting takes us a step further, as it is based on a practice that banks relationships. In fact, Black Ghosts goes beyond post-colonial critique and opens new possibilities for world literature, challenging storytelling as a practice that can and should give new agency to active citizenship. It is literature that returns to orature, shifting the creative act from a pure literate dimension to a collaborative practice of listening, questioning, telling, performing, inhabiting stories, and therefore history. Floridia's notes, juxtaposed with Sarapur's stunning images, give an account of an experience of a collective rereading of Joseph Conrad's classic, itself the starting point of what later became a performance, staged in non-traditional theaters in our city. By so doing, Black Ghosts has turned lost spaces into regenerated places, shaping alternative ways of reading, rereading, telling, writing, performing, and shifting from the individual, private creative act to a community process more aware of cultural, historical, linguistic, and artistic diversity. As readers and spectators, but even more so as active citizens, through Black Ghosts, we shift from one text, Conrad, to another text, Floridia Poor, where the same word, text, indicates two very different things. The traditional literate form of the source work metamorphosizes into a transmedia and multisensory experience in Floridian Poor's work, which on the same spatial axis, the printed text, gives an account not only of the shared reading of Conrad's classic, as well as of the technical and structural challenges faced to stage the resulting narrative, but also and above all of the participatory process in which a heterogeneous community of actors, migrants, and citizens, in fact, people, created a shared story capable of containing, in addition to Conrad's, a bit of all other stories. It is as if the Conradian novel plunged into a dangerous though exciting narrative maelstrom made of words, sounds, noises, and more, to resurface enriched with a variety of stories, speaking towards a diverse, inclusive, and more creative civil awareness. Black Ghosts is more than just a book, as it shapes a new shared territory without borders that invites us to reconsider modes of being and of becoming humans, because people are the territory, and this is why a territory is unavoidably mobile, changing, colored, complex, as your book. It is therefore self-evident, to answer your question, how this aesthetic product enacts a post-colonial critique fully inscribed in an alternative world literature semantics. Yes, it is aesthetically a beautiful product that seduces you for the quality of its verbal, visual, vocal narrative. However, I think it is way more than just that, as that aesthetic matches a project that is first and foremost an ethical one, vibrant because of its humanity. Concluding his famous Leaves of Grass, the poem that stands at a turning point in the literary history of the United States, Walt Whitman, the Bard of Freedom, wrote, "Camerado, this is no book. Who touches this, touches a man." So, Pietro and Sara, concluding my brief statement on Black Ghosts, a book that shapes a different understanding of what storytelling can do to refresh post-colonial critique and redefine the ethical challenges for world literature today, I too boldly but firmly state, camarados, this is no book. Who touches this, touches humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. I really don't want to add any more words to these incredible talks that actually brought us from the first movement we started, where we started with a linear story, brought it into this very complex semantics, into the community, the interdisciplinary, the community made of artistic, linguistic, cultural diversity that in fact was mentioned by Elena, and which is somehow represented also into this text. I only want to say one last word, because we went through these movements, first through the story, then through the action, and now here we're talking about this text. And I want to say that this text was the scenario to start all of our actions. So again, the story starts again with a new layer and adding new voices, new perspectives. And so thank you so much for this community that, well, is actually a community is around you, around the work of Cantieri Metici that we've focused on today. And if anyone has any questions, I know it's late, here we are. Okay. Or if you'd like to say anything, Pietro, to finish? No. Okay.
So I'd like to thank you, Pierluigi, Elena, and Timothy for their beautiful contribution to the conference today, and most of all, Rossella for organizing this part of the conference, this focus on Cantieri Metici and Sarah's work, and Pietro and Sarah's work, and which is fascinating indeed, and gave us the chance for me as a speaker, as a conference organizer, and also to our foreigner colleagues to experience in person this wonderful production of the Negro of Narcissus, or the Black Ghost. This is something we were discussing with our colleagues, most with the Scottish one and the English ones. It's the use of the word nigger, because before this panel this morning, we discussed several matters, including the show we are about to see this evening, whose title is Sporco Negro, which is almost another kind of operation. I was warned, please do not pronounce that, because Facebook is very bad also in common language and also in the public sphere. And so this is something we will need to investigate more in the future, because it's so sensitive as an issue that gathering together in this conference, people coming from different areas of Europe, everyone reacted differently to this topic and to this word. I don't know if you would like to add something in this regard.
If I may, there is a wonderful book, 1961, To Kill a Mockingbird, by Harper Lee. And that's where you have Atticus, one of the most incredible character ever designed by a white woman. He's a white lawyer. He's defending an Afro-American who is unjustly accused of a crime, raping a girl. And there is a moment when his girlfriend, his young girl, daughter, asks him why we shouldn't use that word. So I'm not pronouncing the N word, but he does. And Atticus gives the most wonderful answer there, because it's a word that scares only those who actually use it in the bad way. I can't remember the quote exactly, but whoever is interested in knowing why we can use even negative words, if we know how to handle them, that's the book to read.
So thank you, Elena, because this answers to a lot of questions they raised during the conference this morning and also before in the afternoon. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I think we can stop broadcasting now. And thank you. No, stop, because I have one.